Hello, New York City. This is for Connecticut and Wethersfield. But it's especially differentially too because of the subject matter. These are before the World Trade Center attack. In that context and sense, there had been the employment of where we have all these countries in the news, including countries that don't get along with each other, like Russia, Ukraine. They're over here together. Italy. Italy has rules with the Maiano family, with buildings next to the state capitol, construction guys involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders with those buildings, with an O'Brien police forms family, per Rick Faglione. After I graduated, I saw him 5 times on campus when I was in grammar school. And then in middle school, they made one exception. Well, I saw them and they made confessions. That's why I know, in other words, they were planting things since everyone was little kids, where and how differential criminally foreign influence the branches of government in other countries and the areas of overt criminal enterprises. They are also involved with connections between the ages and areas and natures of campuses, including ones that have nothing to do with each other, per a method that measures and maintains, blamed on other things, others, ourselves. The increasing negative value nature progressions tied to the recorded overt / insidious possessions of the proper answers and of the proper of nature of approach to answers to the questions of American history and of each modern history and sciences. You don't leave out the database relationships, how they were criminally foreign influenced. The second you hear Jim Crow laws, there were criminally foreign influenced database relationships. You don't leave out how the victims needing to respond to that as fact treatment nature as the breaching method had employed everyone A through Z. Doing it wrong, needing to counter things like criminal insidiousness at all locations, areas, and states, further into sciences. Per what was further and further keeping that per uses of all locations, everyone missed, except for an extent. To an extent, every columnist didn't want to be a columnist, didn't want to be that corrupt system. Even the Native Americans were forced to be on that system, and that's sustained. That's what made them fight with each other, divide and conquer. They say, have things said to keep Nave, A, therefore B treatments, criminal insidious natures of theater takes on American history and of justifications of that. When people say mental health, oh, I'm not a mental health doctor. Everyone has mental health people. They're nutbags speaking for people, and they're building upon fake words that people had. Since founding, they have been preventing equality of fact treatment nature, and that is increasingly tied to subject treatments at other locations, and as collusions that the breaching method employed before any jobs were employed. The breaching method's crazy laws against everyone and the people standing next to them. Not just with free speech. We haven't freed the individual speech yet. Using groups, groupthink, no. Use the phrase, where an extent of honest counter to the World Trade Center attack was involved. There are recorded conscious cover-ups of sequence shifts and predicate acts roles that had nothing to do with the World Trade Center attack, except for where they blamed on other things, others, themselves, and pretended not to realize that and hid their extent, because they know they do things that they can't go back and be honest about later. All the names that were propagated to these political narratives, they look at America as through contrast, because in other words, on a mass scale, they have opinions and convictions that can't defend themselves and afford what they want spoken for them at the same time, per this breaching method that started when you guys were kids. It's recorded, but that's why it's relevant to where and to how you can't afford what's hyper evidential and actually recorded to be discerned. So you have been preventing me and others the ability to counter interbranch faking things at locations, planting evidences since we're kids. All exceptions, exception nature appear to be a demonstration of other and demonstration of the same thing. And then they name stack. How many people are name stacked involved with uses of parks and phenomenon with the corners of streets, pseudo corners on the streets, side entrances to parks? The same thing with campuses, because it's all involved with that original method using all locations. It knew then, though, it could be through other motivations, nature, needs, interests, on and off victim predator locations, like where campuses are directed to pretend they believe things are practical that are impractical regarding their treatments of black and white. Also with passions and emotions sickly distinctly after they have demonstrated from off campuses influenced foreign countries and our leaderships record, confess, demonstrate simultaneously. They're going to pretend other inclusions. We're too, where people speak through others. They're putting fake things, passions and emotions regarding the interactions between black and white students in Wethersfield through time, for example. They're making the white power people, the KKK themed and the black themed interbranch and the exception nature tied to them. No, you're putting your private tied to the interbranch. You're putting fake evidences there. That's influencing them. They're using it. You have some sick people speaking about crimes, speaking about subjects when they're brought up, like guns, any subject. And this breaching method measures and maintains that the outcome because they're a certain type of victim predator. Then they pretend it's personal because they faked conversations first. The Connecticut news media confess, demonstrate, confirm, record rules with a crime method that uses the corners of streets on schools too, with an O'Brien police forms family, with the Hartford police forms and a former director of the FBI in his defendant capacities, leading up to that case and leading up to other cases and since. And actively now they are involved with wire crimes with Wethersfield police and with interbranch, where they have methods recorded, individually grouped in together, criminally foreign influenced and simultaneously delusions wrought. This was his interstates. So please, people, start watching Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN. Keep switching between them. Because also they have criminally foreign influence reading as the statutes are agencies. New York City, you know that people will get along and believe things other than they say we believe. Then people have to pretend they're practical. They speak about, you guys are in a rat trap / hyper rat trap. It has all employed roles with it and calling other people the rats because they're sequence shifting, because of how the interbranch have been planting faked evidences with people that went to our schools. And they'll tell you that, but people want privacy. That's why privacy keeps coming up dishonestly. The Wethersfield police, with other police forms like state police, forensics locations through time, they have roles with predicate acts with houses on my street. There's a Jamie Smith and a David Smith. I had nothing to do with them. They tried to make fake exceptions years ago, and that was used that way. It's mostly former director of the FBI, but it's mostly the breaching method that used him and everyone else remotely since they were kids. And he with the kids at the schools I went to. I don't know if Jamie Smith and David Smith, I never saw them on a campus I went to in my life. Their mother worked with the Wethersfield, the police department, the people they answer the phones with it through time. And she has roles with people involved with identity thefts and frauds against me. and violence, and with their doctors, and doctors with their patients and criminals before they got caught crimes with them. Roles with untimely deaths that brought up a principal child abuser's campus. They prevented me from reporting that by fabricating emails, including with the WTNH, Fox Connecticut News, and WFSB recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed their wire crimes also with their phones are tied to the fake conversations with me with their investigators, also with ones at the locations next to WFSB. So I've never seen John Maiano and Ray, what's his name? I barely seen him and Ray Cololo together, who's someone on my street. The John, after he graduated. Ray Cololo is one of the names online involved with doctors and their patients and his family members, further with the principal child sex offenders campus, further with digital upskirt pictures on Twitter, where they have the private policing of the online platforms, and they have the agencies readings of statutes, and they have private lawyers, and they have areas of overt criminal enterprises, private ones, originally and still charged or uncharged. You could discern it. That's why they're not following the law. They're also criminally foreign influence readings of statutes all kinds of ways simultaneously, including one. I didn't read it because they put it up real fast on CNN, but per their communication of it, also they have on-off Paul Manafort Drive. And there was a girl with a female voice in the background. They didn't show her face. There are male and female distinctly, non-distinctly, sickly, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously being used all kinds of ways, interstates and intercities, where they have to hide lipoaggressions, but also hyper ways. Because then blame out that, in other words, they have so many countries on that share the campuses. They have families that had to hide lipoaggressions from their roles with uses of locations in the past, with databases where they're putting fake evidences into databases, completely made up, and things to replace which actually recorded with fabricated audio and video transcripts, fake ties between people, fake natures of ties between people, fake communications with kids and their families, and fake communications between the kids and their families themselves. And with the news media multi-front, while Interbranch has been using cases and also same differentially criminally foreign influence, increasingly it's used, it's self-valued, perfected uses of them. All exceptions, exception nature, are even applied effectively by the breaching method, because they don't want to be bad people, but they come out to the same evil, insidiously pretending other. Honesty was never allowed to use to use what is simultaneously recorded. We're not permitted at locations Interbranch time treatments unless they are going to be entertaining that which uses time simultaneously too fast and simultaneously too slow in other ways to get over on forever nature, to get over on our fact treatment nature, on our identities. This is worse than extortion, with the lead into all types of jobs and industries, because those are positive and negative treatments. Those are value treatments. And that is with and where and how. Although all those value treatments left out, where and how nature has syntactical possessions over, the nature and the quality of how we need to speak, what the answer really is, how to discern really what the answer is, how to discern really the significance of finite details, for example, which is inseparable from the difference, and as the difference of every individual. See, groupthink can't help it. You can't help as a group to speak what one individual of your group is going to speak. You can't help as a group. The species body, individual, is reliant upon our individual bodies. See, we're using systems that never applied. Where and how, the science of the sciences never heard it anything but applied abridged. Never heard it anything but justifications of using time simultaneously, too fast, too slow, with subjects. And with the presentation of them on paper, when they left out, recorded, consciously used, consciously employed. Uses, for example, of differentially criminally foreign influence. If you're an interbranch kid, for example, and or an adult, and simultaneously each age of them, and you have to pretend that the law has been spoken for, because that's the interpretation of real justice must satisfy real justice. All appearances of real justice you have. And or that's the interpretation of Marbury versus Madison you have. It's a criminal insidiousness one. Real justice must satisfy all appearances of real justice. Because what generates the finite is, there's only one identity of value progression that can be might and power and the order of the finite simultaneously. So we can't contemplate properly and walk and react in our surroundings at the same time. We have to understand how victim predators are being and having been used remotely. Forgiveness is for this, because we have to, the breaching method knew that syntactically to be able to communicate what we actually are capable of discerning. For example, a breaching method clearer than day and night are about to clear the mind. In other words, hyper-evidential is that and how. The breaching method, even if you only want to call it colonization, those crazy laws they have with the databases against every single person sickly distinctly. It was to keep how sickly, not just to keep how sickly non-distinctly from being discerned. Not just to employ the motivations and needs for the non-discernment of it propagated and self-cultivated. A singular breaching method maintains that and simultaneously self-value. And so where identity approaches the conception of our words is maintained, built to fail. The legion must return. I hear. Campus Marcius. So they have physical delusions juxtaposed with criminally foreign influenced fact-driven nature and identity nature as criminal insidiousness. I'm not a lawyer. Lawyers too, hyper-evidentially, most Americans would agree. And the ones who don't agree would be able to, in other words, New York City and cities throughout the world are in a trap that also tactically denatured since before our founding parents were even born, before cars were even designed, the suburbs. The scale and infrastructure and the nature of the homes. One still standing since before our founding parents were even born. Born into, and even after they won the American Revolution, even after they secured it with the War of 1812. They had not won liberation from that which had been entrenched. For example, most overt / insidious, how they had slavery sickly distinctly in the North and South, and simultaneously hyper evidential with this simultaneously, how they left out and leave out all the crazy colonial laws and physical delusions only capable of the people. And or they had to pretend other, or they'd be hurt and sensed. They had to pretend other too, because the breaching method was keeping how sickly non-distinctly from being discerned. And that's sustained because then it knew now has all kinds of natures of industries, of people that can't speak about, that can't afford the significance of the revelations that come from where and how we could use our and should use our subjects' treatments and reason. So in other words, the mental health field is also being and having been juxtaposed with known, methods, uncharged but recorded, of drugs and medicines crimes, evidence crimes, as rules, as collusions at locations, no, as rules with collusions with predicate act methods in cases that are the subject of Jim Crow laws, let alone of slavery. And that is inseparable from that which was and is sustained against the Native Americans sickly distinctly too. So we could see, thank God, how the Constitution is abridged. Thank God we could discern how nature itself is going to demonstrate negative value nature progression to acts and natures. See, it knew that it would be nature itself would demonstrate its breaching method. That's why it sustained it. Did way worse than divide and conquer. It sustained and built self-value, defenses of identities, all tactically ulterior from that when we are hyper-native pure, as the species body when it's also positive onto itself. So the species body has Native Americans, thank God, left manifest to sense if and where and how we're not going by the value nature system that's going to cause positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures, and hyper additionally with the ground, the way it works. We're not using its system. So all kinds of even in the adaptation of where and how they've been at closing the whiting forensics. There are other forensics locations. That place has been involved with crimes online and at locations, putting fake things in databases, various natures of courts. These are sick predators that we have, A through Z, people A through Z, and overt criminal enterprises at the same time, keeping each other, blaming where, how, why. Someone there with the youngest kids. You had to have the word criminal insidiousness known. Thank you. Yes.